On April 1st, 2006, a medical student walked into a crowded bar in Columbus, Ohio. Security cameras captured him entering. They never captured him leaving. Every single person who walked into that bar that night was accounted for on camera as they left, except one. This is the story of the man who vanished into thin air and the horrifying question that has haunted investigators for 19 years. How do you disappear from a place that's impossible to disappear from? Brian Shaffer wasn't supposed to disappear. At 27 years old, he had the kind of future most people only dream about. A second-year medical student at Ohio State University's College of Medicine, he'd already completed his white coat ceremony and was well on his way to becoming a doctor. 6'2", charismatic, with a smile that could light up a room, Brian was the guy everyone wanted to be around. His friends described him as funny, intelligent, outgoing, the kind of person who made every gathering better just by showing up. But here's the thing about Brian that made him different from your typical med student grinding through anatomy textbooks and clinical rotations. Deep down, he didn't dream of stethoscopes and hospital rounds. He dreamed of beaches, of tropical sunsets, of playing Jimmy Buffett covers in a band on some Caribbean island where the biggest worry was whether the rum was cold enough. He even had a Pearl Jam logo tattooed on his upper right arm, a permanent reminder that he was more artist than scientist at heart. Medicine was the practical choice, the safe choice, the choice that made his family proud. But was it what Brian really wanted? We'll never know because 3 weeks before Brian disappeared, his world shattered. March 6, 2006. His mother, Renee Shaffer, lost her battle with myelodysplasia, a rare blood cancer. She was 51 years old. Renee wasn't just Brian's mother. She was his inspiration, the nurse who'd sparked his interest in medicine, the woman he called the greatest and most wonderful person in the world. Her death devastated him. He showed up an hour late to her funeral, unable to process the grief that was swallowing him whole. In the days that followed, Brian started saying strange things. He asked his girlfriend, Alexis Wagoner, a fellow medical student he'd been dating, to run away with him. It wasn't clear if he was joking or serious, but there was something desperate in his voice, something that suggested he was looking for an escape from the pain that was crushing him. Then, just days before he vanished, he told Alexis something that still haunts her to this day. You should move on and find someone else. But despite these dark moments, Brian was still making plans. He and Alexis had a trip scheduled to Miami for spring break, leaving Monday, April 3rd. Their families believed Brian was going to propose to her on that trip. He'd even confirmed the travel plans with her just hours before he disappeared. So was Brian a man planning his future, or was he a man planning his escape? March 31st, 2006. It was Friday evening, the start of spring break. Finals were over. Brian met his father, Randy, for dinner at a local steakhouse. They were both still grieving Renee's death, trying to find comfort in each other's company. But Randy noticed something that worried him. Brian looked exhausted, drained from pulling all-nighters studying for exams, worn down by grief he couldn't escape. Randy had a feeling, one of those gut instincts a parent gets when something isn't right. He didn't think Brian should go out that night, but he kept his mouth shut, didn't voice his concerns, didn't want to seem overprotective. That decision would haunt Randy Shaffer for the rest of his life. At 9 o'clock that evening, Brian left his father and met his friend William Clint Florence at a bar called the Ugly Tuna Saloona. It was located on the second floor of a building on North High Street, right in the heart of Ohio State's campus. The plan was simple: blow off some steam, have a few drinks, celebrate the start of spring break. By 2 in the morning, Brian Shaffer had vanished from the face of the earth. Let me paint you a picture of what happened that night, because the timeline is crucial to understanding just how impossible this disappearance really is. 9 p.m. Brian meets Clint at the Ugly Tuna Saloona. 1 hour later, at 10 o'clock, he steps outside to call Alexis. She's in Toledo visiting her family before their Monday flight to Miami. Brian tells her he loves her. He confirms their travel plans. Everything sounds normal. This phone call would be the last time anyone would ever hear Brian Shaffer's voice. Brian and Clint don't stay at the Ugly Tuna. They go bar hopping, working their way through Columbus's Arena District and Short North, hitting multiple bars and taking a shot of hard liquor at each stop. Both of them are getting progressively drunk as the night wears on. After midnight, they run into Meredith Reed, a friend of Clint's, who offers them a ride back to where they started, the Ugly Tuna Saloona. Here's where the security cameras enter the story, and here's where this case transforms from a missing persons investigation into something that defies all logic and reason. At 1:15 a.m. on April 1st, 2006, a security camera captures Brian, Clint, and Meredith riding an escalator up to the Ugly Tuna's second-floor entrance. The footage is grainy, typical of 2006 security camera quality, but there's no question it's them. They enter the bar for what they think will be one last round before calling it a night. At 1:55 a.m., Brian appears on camera again. He's standing outside the bar, talking to two young women. He looks relaxed, casual, chatting easily like he's just stepped out for some air or to continue a conversation away from the noise inside. Witnesses later said he was flirting, even took one of the women's phone numbers. Then he says goodbye to them, and the camera shows him moving off-screen in the direction of the bar entrance, apparently heading back inside. This is the last confirmed sighting of Brian Shaffer. This 40-second clip of security footage would become the most analyzed piece of evidence in one of America's most baffling missing persons cases. The bar closes at 2 a.m. Clint and Meredith realize they haven't seen Brian in a while. They search the two-story bar, checking everywhere, calling his phone over and over. No answer. They look in the bathrooms, scan the crowd, ask people if they've seen their friend. Nothing. When the bar empties out and everyone files down the escalator to leave, Clint and Meredith wait outside, assuming Brian will appear any second. He has to appear, right? There's only one way out of this bar, and that's down the escalator they're standing next to. But Brian never comes down those stairs. When the last person leaves and the bar goes dark, Brian still hasn't appeared. Clint and Meredith make an assumption that seems reasonable at the time. Brian must have somehow slipped past them and gone home. Maybe he was drunker than they thought. Maybe he got tired of waiting for them. It's annoying, sure, but not alarming. At 2:10 a.m., Brian's phone receives its last signal, a text message from Clint asking where he is. The phone is on, it's working, but Brian doesn't respond. The weekend passes. Alexis calls Brian repeatedly, straight to voicemail. Randy calls his son, straight to voicemail. By Sunday, people are starting to worry, but they're still holding on to hope. Maybe Brian went on a bender. Maybe he's sleeping it off somewhere. Maybe his phone died. Monday morning, April 3rd, 2006. Brian doesn't show up at the airport. The flight to Miami departs without him. That's when everyone knows something is terribly, horribly wrong. Brian Shaffer is officially reported missing. Now we get to the part that makes this case absolutely insane. The part that has kept investigators up at night for 19 years. The part that breaks every rule of logic and physics. The Columbus Police Department began their investigation at the Ugly Tuna Saloona because that's where Brian was last seen. And here's the thing you need to understand about this particular bar and this particular building. It was absolutely covered in security cameras. Columbus, Ohio had more security cameras than any other city in the state at that time. More than Cleveland, more than Toledo, more than Cincinnati. The area around South Campus Gateway, where the Ugly Tuna was located, had a high crime rate, so the building owners had installed cameras everywhere. The police sat down and reviewed every single second of security footage from that night. Every angle, every camera, every person who entered that bar. And here's what they found. They could account for every single person who walked into the Ugly Tuna Saloona that night as they left. Every single person. The footage shows a steady stream of drunk college students, couples, groups of friends, all making their way down the escalator as the bar closed. The police identified them all, except one. Brian Shaffer enters on camera at 1:15 a.m. He appears outside briefly at 1:55 a.m., then moves back toward the entrance. After that, nothing. Not a single frame of footage shows Brian Shaffer leaving that building. Detective Andre Edwards, one of the lead investigators, reviewed the footage so many times he could probably recite every person's movements from memory. He made a statement that sent chills down everyone's spine. I can say with 100% certainty that Brian Shaffer did not leave via the escalator. But wait, you're thinking, there must be another exit, right? There was. The bar had a service door in the back used by employees that led to a construction site. The building was relatively new, and parts of it were still under construction. But here's the problem. That exit was either monitored by security cameras too, or it led to such a dangerous construction zone that a drunk person navigating it seems nearly impossible. And even if Brian did somehow stumble through a dark construction site, he would have emerged somewhere. The police checked the footage from 3 other nearby bars, looking for any sign of Brian walking past. Nothing. They brought in dogs. The dogs tracked a scent to a Wendy's parking lot, though the handler wasn't 100% certain it was Brian's scent. They searched dumpsters, alleys, rooftops. They got the city of Columbus to let them into the sewer system to search there. They looked everywhere. Brian's apartment was 6 blocks from the bar. Police went there, hoping to find him passed out on his couch or sleeping off the worst hangover of his life. His car was parked outside exactly where it should be. Inside the apartment, everything was normal, bed made, medical textbooks stacked neatly on his desk. No signs of a struggle, no signs of hurried packing, no indication that Brian had come home and left again. It was like he'd simply evaporated. Then investigators started looking at the financial records, and what they found made the case even more disturbing. From the moment Brian Shaffer disappeared, there has been 0 activity on his bank accounts. 0 activity on his credit cards. His phone went straight to voicemail and never turned back on, except for that one mysterious incident in September. 5 months after Brian vanished, Alexis Wagoner was still calling his phone every single night before bed. It was a ritual born of grief and desperate hope. Every night the phone went straight to voicemail, exactly what you'd expect from a phone whose battery died months ago. But one night in September 2006, something changed. The phone rang 3 times. Alexis nearly dropped her phone when she heard that ringing instead of the immediate voicemail she'd grown accustomed to. Her heart was racing. 3 rings. Someone could be on the other end. Someone could pick up. But nobody did. After 3 rings, it went to voicemail. She called back immediately, over and over, and later wrote on her MySpace page, "I kept calling it purely because it was one of the best sounds I've ever heard, even if no one picked up." The phone company traced the signal. It had pinged off a cell tower in Hilliard, Ohio, about 14 miles northwest of Columbus. Was Brian alive? Was he out there somewhere, his phone finally charged after months? Singular, Brian's phone provider, crushed that hope quickly. They said the rings were likely a computer glitch, a technical error that meant nothing, but that cell tower ping stayed in the case file, an unexplained anomaly that nobody could quite dismiss. Now let's talk about the person who makes this entire case even more suspicious. Clint Florence. Clint was Brian's best friend, the last person confirmed to be with him that night. When police started investigating, they asked everyone who'd seen Brian that evening to take polygraph tests. Randy Shaffer, Brian's father, took one and passed. Meredith Reed took one and passed. Everyone cooperated fully with the investigation. Everyone except Clint Florence. Clint immediately hired a criminal defense attorney and refused to take a polygraph test. Not once, but twice. He cut off all contact with Brian's family and friends the moment detectives got involved. Derek Shaffer, Brian's younger brother, said it best. As soon as the detective started getting involved, that's when he pretty much had no contact with anybody. I've always thought he definitely knows something, just won't come forward with it. In September 2008, Clint's attorney, Neil Rosenberg, wrote an email to a private investigator helping the Shaffer family. In that email, he made a statement that added fuel to an already raging fire of speculation. If Brian is alive, which is what I'm led to believe after speaking with the detective involved, then it is Brian, and not Clint, who is causing his family pain and hardship. The attorney claimed Clint refused the polygraph not because he was hiding something, but because he'd already told police everything and had nothing new to add. But here's the thing. If Clint knows Brian is alive somewhere, living under a new identity, why wouldn't he just say that? Why hire an attorney? Why cut off the grieving family? It doesn't add up. The theories about what happened to Brian Shaffer have multiplied over the years. Some people think he ended his life, overwhelmed by his mother's death and the pressure of medical school. But no body has ever been found, and such victims rarely choose crowded bars as their final location. Others believe he was killed, possibly attacked after leaving through that service door into the construction site. The smiley face killer theory circulated for a while, suggesting Brian was a victim of a serial killer targeting young men near bars, but Columbus police and the FBI rejected that connection entirely. The most persistent theory is that Brian staged his own disappearance, that he's living somewhere tropical under a new name, finally living that Jimmy Buffett dream he always talked about. This theory gained traction in 2008 when something absolutely bizarre happened. 2 years after Brian vanished, his father Randy was killed in a freak accident. A tree branch fell on him during a windstorm, striking him in the neck and killing him instantly. When Randy's obituary was posted online, a message appeared in the condolence book that made everyone's blood run cold. To Dad, love Brian, U.S. Virgin Islands. Was Brian alive? Was he reaching out from some Caribbean island? Police traced the message to a public computer in Franklin County, Ohio. It was a hoax, a cruel prank by someone with a twisted sense of humor. But it planted a seed that refuses to die. What if Brian really did walk away from his life that night? In 2021, the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation released an age-progressed photo showing what Brian would look like at 42 years old. They used photos of his parents and brother to predict how his features would have aged. The forensic artist who created it said something that captures the heartbreak of this case perfectly. Hope doesn't have an expiration date. Every missing person counts. Today, Derek Shaffer is the last surviving member of his immediate family. His mother died in 2006. His brother vanished in 2006. His father died in 2008. He wears a missing persons bracelet and keeps a low profile, still holding on to the hope that one day he'll see Brian again. Alexis moved on with her life, got married in 2009, had children, became an OBGYN in Toledo, but she's never forgotten the man who told her he loved her hours before he disappeared forever. The case remains open. Columbus police still receive tips, still review the evidence that fills 4 boxes in their storage room. They've called it the most baffling case in the department's history, because 19 years later, nobody can answer the question that started this whole nightmare. How does a 6'2" medical student vanish from a second-floor bar with only one exit, surrounded by security cameras, in a building where every other person was accounted for? Brian Shaffer walked into the Ugly Tuna Saloona on April 1st, 2006. The cameras show him entering. They never show him leaving. And somewhere, somehow, a 27-year-old man with his whole life ahead of him simply ceased to exist.